Hello, welcome everyone to September's edition of Unlimited, where we interview incredible people who are changing the world. My name is Zenka. This is Adam. We're from LightNet, and we're here today with Dr. Tara Deliberto. She's a clinical psychologist who has used her research at Cornell University and Harvard University to really analyze how we rise in spirit, in our spirituality, in our consciousness. And I was so struck by her work because she dissects the values and the way you do things, why you do things, your values and your goals. And one of the things that's so interesting about this is she dissects it based on the ego, and then also the lower ego, which I had never heard any of this at all ever, which is this almost like a subservient way to be. So if an egotistical person's like, I'm doing this, it's my way, I want all the glory. And the subservient person has a lower ego. And it actually it's just as contriving, right? As you build your life. And she talks about higher consciousness and what it means to really analyze where we are, what are we thinking, what are our ideals. That was the word I couldn't think of, ideals. What are our ideals? And how to do that. And she's going to share with us today her research, and we're really going to go into this so that all of us can walk away tonight understanding this new way of really self-analyzing ourselves, so we can start to make decisions that are in our higher consciousness. So welcome. I've been looking forward to this for a couple weeks now. I'm very excited to have you, Tara.
Oh, Zenka, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much for having me here on the show. Any opportunity to discuss this work, I just jump on, let alone this one. I am such a huge fan of LightNet and Zenka and Adam. And again, just really an honor and a pleasure to be here. So I'll hand it back over to you. Where would you like to start?
Well, I wanted to start. I mean, I think we should go back at the end of the interview about how you came to this, but let's dive straight into this. How does your system work? Because one of the things that is so interesting about what you're doing is that we always talk about fear and love, and trying to be on the other side. But as you mentioned, no one has a practical, simple solution where you can go from point A to point B and it's very, very clear. So for me, this is really the instruction manual we've all been wanting. And why don't you tell people about it and how it works?
Sure. So a little bit about my background and kind of how I got from point A to point B. So when I was on faculty at Cornell's medical school, I developed a treatment for eating disorders, which sounds totally unrelated to this, but I'll tell you, it is the framework for kind of how to think about how to get out of ego. So when we're really tied to specific ideals, like for instance, thinness or having our body look a certain way, what we do is we make our decisions all day, every day about what food we're eating, what we're doing for exercise, what clothes we're wearing, based on fear of not being good enough, and our fears of not being enough, and maybe being abandoned or rejected. And so understanding how to help a person get out of the egoic problems, the egoic matrix, essentially, of an eating disorder was my background. So what I did, well, just as the brief story, and then I'll kind of mention the three steps of the method. I started developing a treatment that's been published by New Harbinger, et cetera, and translated into Spanish and is used all over the world for the treatment of eating disorders. And once that went into the publisher, I thought to myself, how can I generalize this process of getting out of ego beyond just eating disorders? And so I started cataloging all of these different egoic domains. So not just thinness, but for instance, having the ideal of wealth or fame or even people pleasing. So Zenka mentioned this low status ego. So the ego can present itself in two different ways, either this kind of what I call like power oriented ego of like wanting certain things in the physical world, or wanting to serve other people and rather more their ego rather than serving them. So there's kind of an alpha ego and a beta ego. And I call this high and low status ego. So once I started developing these kind of basic concepts, I came up with 3 specific steps. And the steps are as follows. One, identify the aspects of your ego that you might not even be aware of exist, or you might not even be aware of are rooted in fear or are problematic. Because we live in a society that promotes egoic ideals. And so all day, every day, we're being fed these messages about what we should strive for and how to build our sense of self-worth based on what we accomplish, rather than knowing that it's inherent and that we're beyond worth and we transcend worth. So in this society, right, where we're bombarded with these messages verbally and on social media, etc., it's really hard to even understand what is ego and what is not. And so I decided that it'd be a really good idea to develop what I call the ego personality test, which is a really comprehensive measure that maps out essentially the entire state of your ego based on modern egoic ideals. So I love what the Buddhists have done, for instance, right? In helping people to identify ego, etc. And a lot of the methods are ancient, and they don't necessarily discuss how to get out of modern day egoic issues. So that's really where I think my work comes into play, bringing in psychological understanding of the process of how to get out of ego, and then also understanding how to do that in a modern day context with modern day ideals. So step one is identifying these aspects of your ego that you've been carrying with you, maybe not even knowing this whole time that you've been alive or since you were young, etc. So after you identify these aspects of your ego, the next step is taking conscious action. And the third step is transcending these ego aspects that you have using meditation. Now, let's go back to step 2. What is taking conscious action? Taking conscious action in this framework is taking action that is specifically targeted to go against your specific ego. So for instance, if you have an eating disorder and your whole day is spent thinking about how to get thinner and what foods to avoid and how to go to the gym and counting calories and all of this stuff, your mind is constantly on this fear loop and you're not connected to your higher self, right? So what you can do to untether yourself from that obsessive thinking is, for instance, eat a cookie. Now, eating a cookie isn't generally, thought of as a conscious action, right? But if you're terrified of gaining weight, and that fear of gaining weight is running your life, then doing the opposite of what your fear wants you to do is actually part of taking a step in line with love. It's really counterintuitive, right? So like, this is the thing where it's like, even in this moment, some of this like resistance can be coming up to this because like, oh, well, I don't want to gain weight and like sugar is bad and all this stuff, right? So that's what makes this method so, I think, different, is that it's aware of all of the 3D matrix traps, the fear traps. And it's not about maximizing things in the 3D. It's about figuring out how to get out of your fear. So I'm not saying you should eat cookies all day, every day, and all of that, but taking conscious action is going to be different for everybody, which is the point. So if you've been, for instance, on the other hand, just mindlessly eating cookies, all day, every day, and not thinking about your health, etc., then not eating a cookie would be a conscious action, for instance, right? So the conscious action, the point is here, is entirely dependent upon what your own ego looks like. Another example that doesn't have to do with food is wealth. So let's say that your ego is really focused on maintaining your wealth or gaining wealth in order to feel worthwhile. And there's this fear of what would happen if you didn't have wealth, right? How that ego could express itself in interactions could be, for instance, by being really showy with your money or holding on to your money and hoarding it, right? So if, for instance, your ego is presenting itself as wanting to be really showy, then, for instance, donating anonymously would be a conscious action, right? Or if, oh, that also could serve the, in the other direction too, where it's like if you're hoarding your money, donating also helps you to kind of face that fear and face your ego. So taking conscious action again, is entirely dependent upon what your ego looks like. So after you start taking these actions, what happens is you feel a lot of fear. It's like, whoa, this is scary. It's scary to do these things. And that is precisely the reason why you should do them, because it's trying to avoid that fear that is keeping you trapped in the 3D psychological matrix, right? So when you feel that fear, you allow it to well up inside you, and then you get on the other side of it, then all of a sudden you're untethered. You're like, oh, I don't need to like live my life in this way where I'm hoarding every penny, or I'm, thinking constantly about the way my body looks and if I'm going to get rejected by somebody or whatever it is, right? So it starts to free us up. Now, the reason why the action comes before the meditation is because if you're sitting in a meditation and you haven't started to feel the freedom that comes from feeling your fear and then moving forward and untethering yourself from it, then you're not really going to commit to changing the programming of your mind. So, for instance, if you're really attached to these ideas that you need to pinch every penny because, that makes you feel safe. And so you justify pinching every penny because you feel safe and you don't feel that anxiety about spending money, right? Then you're not going to sit in meditation and program your mind to let go of your fear of money or not having any, right? Because that fear is going to come up and you're not really going to commit. So it's a long process of taking conscious action and trying to reprogram your mind, but to really reprogram your mind away from like real deal fears that your ego is justifying having. It's an ordeal. It's a real ordeal. And so it's tricky because a lot of people, as you were saying, Zenka, earlier, there are methods out there, for instance, for meditation and overcoming fears, but there are two kinds of fears. There are the kinds of fears that people present in therapy as wanting to treat. So, for instance, I'm really afraid of heights. And so I can't fly anywhere and go on vacation with my family because I'm afraid of heights. And so people will say, like, okay, even though I'm afraid, and yes, planes could crash, I know that it's irrational. So I want to get over this phobia, right? So they'll come into treatment, for instance, wanting to treat that phobia. But then there are other kind of fears, the kind of fears that people don't want to give up. They want to hold on to them because they feel like it keeps them safe, right? And this is where things get tricky because everybody's saying, oh, don't live from fear, live from love. But what about all those justifications that come up? No, I need this fear. I need my money. I need to make sure I look a certain way. I will be abandoned and rejected if I don't, fit all these criteria. It's really tricky, right? So that's the thing that this method gets at. It gets at all of those justifications that may or may not be legitimate. But the point is, do you want to live a life tethered in fear and to the 3D? Or do you want to really live from love? And do you really want to feel that internal bliss that comes from untethering yourself from all of these egoic fears and ideals? Right? So if you really want to go for it, it's like no BS, no kidding. Like this is what we're going to do. So it's a little bit hardcore. It's admittedly a little bit of a hardcore method. It's not for like I think like the beginning spiritual seeker. It's like for the real committed. So then that's again where we can start to reprogram our mind, and after that, I'm telling you, and this is like a little bit, more of the story, these states of bliss that you can feel from systematically untethering yourself from all of the fears that you justify. I mean, boy, like that, it's another level. And I'll tell you, I created this method when I was an atheist. I didn't even believe in God. Okay. I just logically put this together and thought, okay, if I wanted to be a better person, I wasn't even thinking about raising consciousness. I just wanted to be a better person. And I also wanted to feel the freedom that comes with not having fear, right? I started doing these meditations and I was blasted into mystical experiences that I didn't even know could happen. I started experiencing extended bliss states that would last months at a time. It was so shocking to me. that I'm now only realizing the power of the own logical method that I put together. And I still think that I don't know, to be quite honest, I still don't fully know like what happens as it unfolds. It is again powerful beyond my wildest expectations, and it's still unfolding. So I'll end there for a moment. I can respond.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I want to go more into the method and stuff, but let's take a pause. And I also want to go more into examples so people can really grab on, because that was a great thing to just, wealth. Like, okay, if you're, have money and your ego's tied up on it because it's like tied up in your self-worth, then maybe you need to give it away. And honestly, like all these or the cookie example, those are really good and those are really concrete. But since you just brought this up about the mystical experiences, if you were to guess, why did those suddenly happen to you?
Ooh, I love that question. I'll tell you. I'll tell you. So the last little bit of this method that I kind of failed to mention, and I kind of Trojan horse it into step 3, which is after reprogramming the mind, something else that you can do that is part of reprogramming the mind is forgiveness. And I think that forgiveness, it seems like a little bit outside of the rest of the method, but it's not. Because where we feel that we are victimized is where our biggest egoic blocks are. Our biggest fears are rooted in our traumas and how people have hurt us, or how we've been hurt by the world, or how we've hurt ourselves in some way. And so what this whole method really does is prepare you for the really big task of, no shit, no kidding, going from victim to we are all one. And even the person that hurt me, I am one with that person. It's all leading up to that. So what happened after I was cataloging my ego and taking conscious action and reprogramming my mind, I started to feel freedom, but I also was miserable. And I thought to myself, okay, if I am a psychologist that has studied pretty much every real deal evidence-based therapy out there, that has research that shows that it works, and I've created my own treatment based on all of these principles, and I've applied it to myself with real fidelity and integrity. If I am still miserable in some way, we have a problem. Like, this is not a good look, and I really need to figure out what the problem is and how to address it. And I sat with myself and I thought, it's because I haven't forgiven. That's it. That's the last thing. I've done everything except that. And I've tried to avoid it, and I try to get around it, and I try to say, okay, like, I forgive this person from like an imperial, I'm better than perspective, right? Like I might not be the victim, but I'm better than them, which is still a power dynamic and it's still an ego thing, right? But I never tried taking their perspective, really taking their perspective and really getting to their experience and really understanding where they came from. So what I did, and I didn't even know what I was doing, but I went into this pretty deep meditative state, and I merged my consciousness with someone who I felt had abused me. I didn't even know that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. And I felt their experience of me. I felt their experience of their own trauma. And I understood with perfect clarity why everything happened the way that it did. And not from an imperial place, but from a real, genuine place. I felt compassion for this person, not pity, nothing egoic, real compassion for what this person went through. And I realized that however much pain they caused me, it was nothing compared to what this person was walking around with, and with no ability, no tools, no support network to deal with it. And so I got out of that meditation and I sat down and I was talking to my friend, and I was explaining to him that I felt so much lighter after having compassion for this person. And then suddenly my consciousness, and again, one moment I was atheist, the next I was not. So in that moment, my consciousness disconnected from my body, and I was in 360-degree light. It was vibrating at this super high intensity. It felt like I couldn't even sustain being there. A lot of people have experiences of going into the light and it being like loving and amazing. This was like intolerable. I could not stay there. I felt like maybe I didn't belong there. I don't know. It was a lot. And I came back into my body and I realized, okay, there's a God and we are all one. And I think what happened in that moment was that, to answer your question, Zenka, I removed the biggest egoic block that I had put between me, and this person based in my fear. And I think when my consciousness connected to that person and I forgave them, I believe that it's almost as if I had repaired a tear in the fabric of the collective consciousness in that at that point. And my mystical experience was being plugged in to the fabric of the collective consciousness and then experiencing oneness in that way. So I had, taken off, all of these egoic blocks and I had been clearing my fears out, but that was the big one. And that big one and facing that big one was the thing that made the difference, because when that egoic block was cleared, again, I was connected to my own consciousness and the collective. So I started thinking about how ego blocks that connection with oneself and then also the collective. And it's funny because psychologists like Jung, for instance, had been talking about this, but I couldn't even read Jung. Jung was like the one psychologist that I never read or understood because my consciousness was not at the level to be able to comprehend that experience. So retroactively, I then started reading all of these transpersonal psychologists and understanding what had happened. So I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to understand that getting rid of these egoic blocks plugged me into the fabric of the collective consciousness. But now I believe that that's what happened.
Wow. Yeah. Uh, I think sometimes it does it's like a gush, like you said, like once you free that, it's gone. And there's a gush. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just boom. Yeah. Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
No, I think of it sometimes, when we talk about being one, I kind of see like this staging area before the Earth journey begins. And somebody's like, you want to do what? You're going to have to play all the roles. You're going to have to be everybody. If you're going to do that, you got to be everybody. And so the victim and the perpetrator are really intertwined as the same, the same extra dimensional consciousness, the same consciousness. They're
Right.
the
And we're just individuated, but really, I mean, we're individuated here in the 3D, but that's just one dimension. That's just the third dimension, just
right.
one, two, three, right? We're three dimensions in, right? To how many dimensions? And so our consciousness is connected in that other dimension, in the collective, and experiencing that what was really, of course, life-changing and paradigm changing. So I talk about this a little bit in the work too, right? There are different paradigms that we live in. And prior to experiencing that oneness, I'm telling you, I did not experience synchronicities. Synchronicities did not happen to me. They were non-existent. Everything was like hard won, hard fought, like just really trying and efforting everything. Nothing happened by magic. Nothing. And then after that, the magic level was through the roof, synchronicities through the roof, effortlessly work getting published, getting speaking opportunities. I mean, I didn't have to try at all. I didn't have to try at all. I didn't have to ask for anything, nothing. And so that was really life-changing, to go from living in a paradigm that was 3D, matter on matter, efforting everything, into this spiritual paradigm and understanding things differently. Now, this only happened to me 7 years ago. So pretty much everybody on this call is probably ahead of the game in terms of like having lived in the spiritual paradigm for longer. So I'm still learning a lot about what life is like in this like third dimension, but also like a little bit maybe like tapped into like the others, and bringing that in and what that's like. So I'm still learning how to navigate that. And I'm still learning how to navigate these bliss states and how to still reconcile the emotions that come up that are not fear related necessarily while having these experiences. So it's still a journey, but yeah, it is something to live in a different paradigm and to have that stark A-B experience. And hopefully I don't go back into A. Hopefully, it stays B. But just that A-B difference is really fascinating to be able to compare and contrast with.
Wow.
Wow, interesting. So, could you go into the three states a little bit? I had a chance to look through some of that today and I found it really interesting.
Yeah, the three different steps. Okay, so can I screen share?
Yeah, that would be great. Go ahead. I was trying to pull it up on my screen.
I got it all set up over here. Okay, so how much time do I have to kind of go through the specifics? Almost like a slideshow, but rather it's a PDF.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. We have another half an hour before we do questions. And just so the listeners know, we are going to be doing a full on masterclass in 2 weeks. So I'll put the information up in the videos. But yeah, let's dive in and really give people an understanding and get your questions ready because she's just now touched the surface of the depth of this. And it's so powerful. And I think it's very easy to follow.
Thank you, Zanka. And also, I'm noticing a comment in the chat from Mindful Manny. Yes, A Course in Miracles really describes forgiveness super well. And there's a footnote in A Course in Miracles that described my experience. And it was the first time I had ever really seen anything that had touched on in print what had happened to me. And I'm forgetting what number it was in the course, but it was very profound to read that little footnote about what happens when you forgive.
Well, the course is 365 lessons, and some people take several years to go through it. It sounds like you are onto a quicker way to cut those because it's like forgiveness. Like there's no you there. It's all that oneness. Like if you are a mirror, and if I'm triggered by you, then you're mirroring what's triggering me within me, but I don't see it because my eyes are pointing out.
Right. So what I'll say is, okay, I'm
I'll
not.
shut up. I'll let you go.
No, it's okay, Manny. I'm having this internal battle. I'll narrate it for you. The internal battle is wanting to kind of go down the path of infomercial. Like this is a quick method to raising your consciousness. But the truth of the matter is it's not. This is not quick. It is a long, hard method that describes things really clearly. But I think so. I'm doing the math. I'm 40 now. I must have been 32, 33 at the time. And I had been working on this at that point for years and really trying to apply it with fidelity for years before these things started happening. And before that, I was in therapy and becoming a therapist. So I had kind of gone through all of this stuff, getting through all my own fears. And so we can say, like, if you're ready to forgive, like if you really want to have that transformative experience and you are able to fully surrender your ego to the person that victimized you and merge in that way, then yeah, I think that you could have that instantaneous healing, that instantaneous paradigm shift. But I'm telling you, I tried for years to forgive and I was not ready. I thought I had it. I didn't have it. And is that say, forgiveness? Yeah.
I've been rubbing this a lot. Rubbing the forgiveness stone.
Okay, so right, it's like I was doing the equivalent of rubbing my forgiveness stone for a very long time. And so yeah, and so maybe this will be the thing for you that tips the scale. I don't know. Let's find out and report back, okay? So I'm going to share my screen. And this is the kind of basic workbook that goes along with the three-step method. And these are the three basic steps. First, insight into your ego, taking conscious action against your ego, and transcending by reprogramming your mind and forgiveness. Okay. The basic framework here is probably one that you've heard of with a little bit of a twist, which is we have a body that is like a radio, a physical 3D body, and then there's a frequency that plays on the radio that is not necessarily 3D. It's ubiquitous and everlasting. The little twist is that there's an ego personality that is like a radio personality that plays on that frequency, and we can tinker around with what the personality is that is playing on that frequency that you are channeling through this body in the 3D. Okay. Briefly, we can identify in one direction or the other. We can identify as the sum of our parts. You know, I'm a thin or fat person. I am a wealthy or poor person. I am a good or bad person. I'm a people pleaser, or I do whatever I want, right? We can have all of these different definitions of who we are that are based in ego. And when we look closer, fear, it's arguable, but I'll teach you a little technique for identifying if something's coming from fear or not for you. Or we can identify as something greater than the sum of our parts, our consciousness. And when we identify as our consciousness, we think of ourselves as being that consciousness that's channeled through an avatar. And this is really expansive. So it's in this book, everything purple is related to higher consciousness, and everything darker, 3D, denser is related to the 3D ego. So as Zenka mentioned before, there's a distinction between values and ideals. And this might sound like, you know, an academic psychologist splitting hairs semantically. And you know what? Maybe it is, but I just invite you to humor me anyway, and going on a little bit of a journey of exploring the distinction between values and ideals. So values are inherently healthy. Ideals are inherently either rooted in ego or higher consciousness. And I'll tell you what I mean. So values are what our avatar values in this world. So for instance, spending time with your family, right? Your family's these 3D members that live here, or getting an education in the 3D, right? These kinds of things. And modern day psychology says, so long as you live life in accordance with your values, you're going to be happy. And if you're not living life in accordance with your values, you won't be fulfilled. So for instance, if you value your family, but you're working all the time, well, you won't feel fulfilled and happy. So you have to work less and spend time with your family, right? So I love this framework. I'm a big fan of it. And I also really respect the guys, Kelly Wilson and Steve Hayes, who created this framework. It's called relational frame theory that this fits within. But I said to Kelly Wilson once a while ago, you know, I have eating disorder patients, and they really only value thinness. And they are living life completely in accordance with their value of thinness, and they're on death's door, and it's really scary, and they are starving themselves. So how is this healthy? How is it fulfilling? And Kelly Wilson said, well, values are inherently healthy. And my friend Dennis Tersch as well said the same thing. And so I thought, okay, thinness can't be a value then. It has to be an ideal. And what happens when we have ideals is that we consider them to be, because they are, our standards of perfection. So if we just live life in accordance with what we think is perfect, we'll be happy. But what we don't realize is we can go a million miles an hour in the wrong direction, trying to be thin, trying to be famous, trying to be wealthy. And then at some point, we may or may not realize that it's not the answer. Right? How many people do you know who are super wealthy and also really, truly happy and fulfilled? Right? So maybe not so many. Jim Carrey has a great quote that goes like this. He wished that everybody could be rich and famous so they could have the insight that it's not the answer. Right? So it's really a trap that we fall into. So I thought, okay, I need to come up with a framework for ideals, actually. So this is what I came up with. There are 4 quadrants. There are ego ideals on the left, and there are 2 categories, and then there are higher consciousness ideals on the right, and there are 2 categories. So the first category of ego ideals are what we were talking about earlier, these power ideals, which is associated with what I call a high status ego. And power ideals help us to avoid our fears, particularly of not being good enough, by overpowering them. So I'm afraid of not being good enough. So I'm just going to overpower that fear and I'm going to diet. I'm going to overpower that fear. I'm going to prove my worth by making money, right? Proving my worth in the 3D with force is the behavior that's usually consistent with having a power ideal. Now, how do you know if it's rooted in fear or not? Right? Maybe it's just practical to be thin and wealthy and famous and all this stuff. Sure, it has its 3D perks. I'm not I'm not glazing over the fact that it's probably awesome in some ways to be like thin, rich, and famous, but it's also horrible in other ways. And it's horrible psychologically because it keeps you trapped in the matrix. So if you ask yourself, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, how afraid would I be if I gained a little weight? Right? Oh, okay. If that fear registers, it means that there's some fear there, right? How afraid would I be if I lost my money? Right? And how would it affect my sense of self-worth? Like these are the questions just that you can ask to start teasing apart if these ideals are based in fear or not. And then there are what I call cower ideals down here. So cower ideals, it's not a judgment like you're a coward, et cetera. It's more like there's these power ideals to overpower fear and cower ideals to avoid the fear. And also cower rhymes with power. So just shipped it. So that's why we went with that. So cower ideals are things like keeping the peace. Seems like a good ideal until you realize that keeping the peace could mean essentially aiding a narcissist, for instance, and their agenda, right? Not speaking the truth. So always being considered a nice person rather than, again, like telling the truth, for instance. So those are the ego ideals, power and cower. And then there are what I call higher consciousness ideals. So the first one, of course, because all of this stuff is coming out of this eating disorder framework, is rather than idealizing thinness, for instance, there's the idealizing lovingly nourishing the body and accepting the way that it looks, right? Wow, that's rooted in compassion. It's not outcome focused. It's not contingent on anything. It's not conditional. It's not like, okay, I'll love my body if it looks a certain way. Nope, there's nothing conditional about higher consciousness ideals. There's nothing about outcome in higher consciousness ideals. It's all about the process of loving for these love ideals that are alternatives to power ideals. So for wealth, an example of a higher consciousness ideal alternative could be being a mindful steward of resources and creating value for myself and others through meaningful work. Right. So it's not about, making a certain amount of money, making $1 million before I'm 50 or whatever. It's about generating meaningful work, generating resources, being a mindful steward of them, and essentially channeling that higher consciousness in your behavior. Right. So do you see the difference there? Right. And if you ask yourself, like, how afraid would you be if you weren't a mindful steward of resources and creating meaning? It's like, what? It's like a nonsense question. There's no fear about not being a mindful steward of resources, right? Like because it's not fear-based. It's based in higher consciousness. It has no root in fear. So that's how you tell. If something doesn't make any sense in relation to fear, higher consciousness. Okay. And so down here, rather than, for instance, keeping the peace, you can have a truth ideal, such as willingness to tolerate discord and discomfort in the process of confronting the truth. Right? Ooh, that's a good ideal, I think. I mean, I wrote it, but like I happen to like this one because it inherently has baked into it this tolerance aspect, that tolerating things that don't feel so good is actually something that can be helpful rather than just trying to avoid it. Right. We're not necessarily being sadistic here and saying like, oh, it's so good to like have pain. It's not that, because that would be more of like a power ideal, actually. Right. Like I'm not good enough unless I'm tolerating pain. There's no aspect of that. It's more just that it's okay. Like you don't have to feel good all the time. Right? We can have a human experience and that's okay. And just making a little room for that in the process of telling the truth and doing something that's rooted in higher consciousness. Okay. And so this breaks down high status ego and low status ego a little bit more and discusses the difference between low status ego and no ego, which are very often confused. So with high status ego, a person has power ideals, they want to be on top, they put their own ego first, and they're social positioning wise the alpha, right? And then the relationship to the higher self is that they reject the higher self, forget this, like, kumbaya stuff. Like, I want to make money, here in the 3D. Like, I want to, like, make this 3D situation ideal. Right. So there's a lot of focus on what happens in the material world rather than, we'll say, what happens in the heart or in consciousness. Low status ego, on the other hand, is comprised of cower ideals, wanting to appease and not upset everyone, keep the peace, not feel that discomfort. And in this case, the person puts everybody else's ego first. So it's not that they put everybody else first. It's not, oh, this person's in need, I have to help them. It's, oh, this person has an egoic desire and they're going to get mad if I don't do what they say. So I'm going to serve their ego, right? That's a different thing. Serving somebody else's ego is not the same as serving someone else. Big distinction, right? And that very often gets clouded. And these folks with lower status egos, they beta in response to the alpha. So they deny their higher self in favor of playing it safe in the 3D and, again, putting everybody else's ego before their ego. Right? Versus if we're operating from higher consciousness without ego, we hold these love and truth ideals, and our objective is to serve. Our behaviors are in line with serving, our social positioning is to serve, and the relation to the higher self is in alignment. Right? It's super simple. It's really simple. Hard to get there, super simple. Right? So this, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This, if you're interested in it briefly, talks about the different consciousness paradigms that I touched on earlier. So I used to live in this, what I call a dense ego paradigm, where I didn't really feel like I had free will because I was just responding to my fear in this very, like, stimulus response way. I wasn't in touch with my higher power. I wasn't in touch with my higher self or the ability to create. I was just, again, forcing things in the physical world. And I could be pretty forceful if I want to be. So, like, some things were moving around, but it was very effortful. And the difference now is totally, yeah, it's totally different. So, I had some mix of power and cower ideals. And depending upon the situation, I could either have a high status ego or I could have a low status ego. So I probably had more low status ego stuff going on, but there were some times where I had some high status ego stuff going on. And I would try to, again, like, force specific things happening that I wanted to happen in the 3D from that power place instead of that higher consciousness place. I had compulsive behavior, right? Making sure that I published all these papers when I was in academia and I was climbing up the ladder. And, it's just so rat in a cage to me now, just looking back on it. And so I wasn't accessing the soul's gifts in the same way. Sure, I was serving, I was working in a hospital, but I was also concerned about my ranking, my status, making it to tenure on my tenure track and all of that, right? And so again, the synchronicities didn't occur versus boom, I forgave, merged consciousness, felt the oneness. And then all of a sudden it's like I had free will. I didn't have that fear. I wasn't living in a trauma response pattern. And so I actually started being able to create. And beyond that, I wasn't even necessarily intentionally creating all the time because these amazing things that would keep happening were beyond my wildest dreams. So it's almost like I wasn't even intending them because I couldn't even dream big enough to intend them. And so they just happen. I mean, it's very interesting stuff, I think. So then I started, I think, using the soul's gifts more in terms of living a more spiritual life, meditating more, and all of that. And then again, I wasn't efforting as much. So just interesting to think about how we'll say thickness of the ego and the denseness of the ego can kind of keep you trapped or not trapped, free in a different paradigm. Brief footnote on this: being a scientist and having, you know, this experience here and then this experience here and down here, not even being able to get through a sentence of Jung, not even understanding what a synchronicity was. It sounded insane to me, versus like, oh yeah, like all this is tracking up here. There's so much effort in the spiritual community that I've seen to like use science to convince scientists that consciousness is real. But what I say is like, if a given scientist is here, it doesn't matter what they're reading on that printed out paper. They will find a fault with that study, even if it's faultless. Like Dean Radin's stuff is so good. It's so on point. He's so smart and his experiments are so well designed. And I know for a fact that if I would have read Dean Radin's studies when I was here, I would have been like, this is BS. Cause like, I couldn't experience it, versus now I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, I find a little thing here or there, but I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Cause it matches my own level of consciousness and it matches where I am. So I always say, forget trying to convince scientists with data that consciousness is real. Like, let's get them to Peru. Like, let's, you know, like try ayahuasca, or like, let's do some meditation, or let's like, and then we'll show them the paper. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of like put that out there in terms of like trying to effort consciousness into this paradigm. It like doesn't work. Like the people in this paradigm, they need to raise consciousness and then they'll get it. So anyway, that just a brief side note there. Okay, just plowing through this. So this is like, we're getting like pretty much through step one. All this is just step one, understanding the framework. So I always say to my patients that self-worth is a worthless concept, because you are inherently worthwhile. You're inherently valid. You know, what is the worth of an ocean? Like, what's the worth of a forest? What's the worth of a person? What's the worth of a child? What's your worth? It's nonsense, right? It's like total nonsense. And we're always trying to figure out how to increase our self-worth. But to me, that sounds like a very 3D game, right? I identify, you know, myself as a worthy person so long as I meet these conditions. Worth is so conditional, right? So how do we get to unconditional love of the self rather than like measuring our worth according to some metric? So here is what I call the ego self-worth pie chart. It's like, okay, I'm worthwhile if I'm rich, thin, and famous, right? Versus self-worth as a weird concept from the spiritual perspective, and just identifying as loving awareness. And then when you're identifying as that loving awareness, all the other stuff just blows off to the side. It just kind of like blows off of the obstructed underlying loving awareness. And then this ego stuff just it doesn't even matter. Like it could say thin, rich, famous, but when you're here, it's like all of this is just noise. It's just noise out here. It's just ego stuff. So this talks a little bit about judgments and justifications. So like when we start to actually look at what our ego self-worth pie chart is made of, the ego just doesn't let you let it go. It puts up a fight. It's almost like if you know that scene in Harry Potter, one of the movies, I'm forgetting which one, but where Dumbledore has to drink this liquid so they can get to the bottom of this bowl and get a Horcrux. And so Dumbledore says, like, no matter what I do, I will put up a fight. Just make sure that I drink this liquid. Like, I need to drink the liquid. And so Harry is feeding Dumbledore the liquid, and he's pleading, he's crying, he's fighting. It's like Dumbledore is trying every possible thing to get Harry to stop, but Harry keeps giving that like bad tasting potion to Dumbledore. To me, that's the process of overcoming ego. Like you start looking at your ego and it's like, no, please, I'm not strong enough to deal with this, right? It fragilizes itself, or then it gets really angry. Like, no, you can't, you can't get rid of me. You need me. And it puts up all of these weird fights, almost like an abusive boyfriend or something. It's like the mental model. Like it's strange. So it's good to know that the ego puts up a fight when you start looking at it, because then you'll be prepared. So when it comes up, you might not believe your own ego's justifications as much as you might had not you been prepared. So this workbook just goes through a little bit of that, but then we get to the main event, which is the ego personality test. And so what you do with the ego personality test is you rate what on the left is important to you on a scale of 0 to 10 versus what's important on the right. So the first item, line 1, has these two parts. One is being the best. So how important is it to you to be the best, 0 to 10? Now, alternatively, and they don't have to add to 10, they can, this is the interesting thing. The ego and higher consciousness, like we have them in different measures. So again, they don't have to add to 10. So how important is it to you to accept your limitations while focusing on your contributions, regardless of the outcome and your performance and how it compares to others? Right. And it's like, all right, like you're starting to realize maybe like just even with this first item, like, okay, like my ego's got some stuff going on here. And like maybe there's some justification. Well, I need to be the best. And like it's good to be the best. And like, shouldn't everybody be the best? Like we're American here, you know? And so there's, you know, that's stuff that can come up. I don't know if everybody's American here, but but it's a very American kind of attitude to have, I can say, as being one. And so you go through this, and really the ego personality test is more than just a measure. It is an experience. And the idea is to mindfully take the ego personality test and notice what comes up, notice how the ego justifies itself, and practice kind of outmaneuvering the ego and aligning yourself with higher consciousness. And that's really a very interesting experience to have. Yeah, and just to say another note. So on the wordings of this, these items aren't worded necessarily like perfectly for everybody. So for some, I used to have like, you know, thinness on here, but not everybody has a body ideal of thinness. Maybe it could be just having a body that looks a certain way, like slim thick is another one. And, you know, so it's more about, it's not about the specific content so much as it is the domain of like what my body looks like or how much money I have in my bank account. So this ego personality test is set up, it maps onto this. So the first part of it is power ideals and love ideals. The second part is cower ideals and truth ideals. So you go through the whole thing, it's a lot. And so I like to set aside, you know, 20 minutes, a half hour to kind of go through it. And then process it. It's really important to process what happened, how the ego justified itself, your emotional experience, and get a good baseline assessment, right? Okay, so that's step 1. And the last 8 minutes I can go quickly through. So then we take conscious action. So for instance, you know, we went through this one earlier, but this kind of has a plan to it. So, you look through your ego personality test and you pick an ideal that, you know, maybe your ego, it was in like the 6, 7 range. If you start with something that's a 10, it might be a little bit too much and it might be too hard. So I like to start in the 6 or 7 range because it's a challenge, but it's not too hard and it's not too easy. So you know, pick an ideally in the 6 or 7 range, and notice what behaviors you have that are in line with that ideal, what the outcome is. Okay, so I have this ego ideal of being a wealthy person. I rated it as a 7. My behaviors are that I work late all the time. The outcome is that I've lost touch with who I am and what's really important to me. My justification that my ego puts up is, well, you need money to survive in this world, and I need to make a living. And so I have to, you know, ignore my kids all the time. And I'm justified in, you know, working extra late hours when like not so much, right? Like there's this justification that comes up. So the higher consciousness ideal is creating value through meaningful work and being a compassionate steward of resources. So I rated this as a 9. So isn't that interesting? So, you know, I have this ego ideal being a wealthy person and I have this justification, but I actually really do think that it's more important to be a compassionate steward of resources. This is a good setup when you actually to start doing this work. When your ego ideal is at like a 7, your higher consciousness ideal is higher. So you're like a little motivated to like work in that direction. If you don't rate the higher consciousness ideal as very high, you might not be motivated. So this is a good, again, starting setup. So the conscious action you need to take, for instance, is telling your boss that you need to work fewer hours. donating money anonymously to an important cause to like let go of that attachment to wealth, and volunteering time maybe to help a neighbor and spend time with the people I love, for instance. So you can create a little action plan. And then, brief note on this, after you get out of the first part of step 2, which is taking action against your own ego, then we kind of get into the service zone. And then also looking at our ego and how we relate to our ego when we serve. Are we coming in with this high status ego and, wanting to save everybody? Right? Because like we would get to be the savior, or are we coming at helping from a low status ego place and compulsively helping people at our own expense? Right? So that, when we start getting into service, it's still helpful to examine your own ego. So in true ego personality test style, I came up with this helping motivations pop quiz. So when you start serving, just tapping in with yourself and seeing where your motivations to serve are coming from. Are they coming from ego, or are they coming from higher consciousness? And just endeavoring to serve from a place of higher consciousness with this specific process, which looks like checking guilt and pity at the door, because those things put you at a different level, right? If you feel guilty that someone is suffering, you're kind of putting yourself down here. If you're pitying someone, you're like putting yourself up here. So just like getting rid of all of that, catching your ego, and then instead of getting pulled into this fear of feeling like you just will help and you won't stop helping, or you don't know how to help, just trust that you can be mindful and loving and connect with your higher self while you're serving. And you can choose to try and operate from these higher consciousness ideals and offer to help when you're willing and able, and it's energizing. And that's another good indicator of whether it's coming from ego or not. If you're depleted by the service, then it's probably coming from ego, versus if you're helping from higher consciousness, everything just really flows. So that's a little good litmus test. So this type of service where you're not only helping in the 3D, but you're internally checking in with yourself and figuring out what's going on with your ego, that raises your consciousness, which raises the collective consciousness, which then from there you can tap into these kind of other higher consciousness places and bring change into the 3D, not just efforting, but like in both ways, through your behavior, but also through your action. So it just, you're just helping at a whole other level when you're being really mindful in this way and serving. And so once you really, feel that, then it's time to do the real work where we see the big shifts happening. And you're like, the real work, it's like, isn't all of this work? I mean, all of this is work. Yes. And when you're ready, getting into these meditations, and for the benefit of all life everywhere, moving into your higher consciousness, right? Going through this emptiness meditation process, if you're familiar with that, which is reminding yourself, right? You're not what others think of you. You exist independently from the thoughts of others. You're not your thoughts. You're the observer of your thoughts. You're not your achievements, right? You're the actor, to Adam's point, right? Like you're the actor playing the role in this life. You're not your identity. You're the possessor of an avatar, right? And this one I love. You're not what you think that you're worth, whether it be a little or a lot. You transcend worth, right? You're not your body. You're in and around your body, right? You're your energetic consciousness field. And so from there, then we kind of get into like really programming the mind away from ego and towards higher consciousness. So programming the mind to, after this meditation, bringing the ideal forward and bringing your behavior in alignment with it, to compassionately accept and address your own needs, for instance, while contributing to helping others. Balancing the following: respecting that everybody's body has different capacities at different times, rather than, wanting your body to be like healthy and thin and beautiful all the time. Accepting that disease and disability can be a part of life. They don't have to be, but they can be. From this non-egoic place, just accepting and loving that people can get sick, for instance. Taking reasonable measures to improve and safeguard the health of yourself and others. Cultivating awareness that you're not your physical body, but conscious beings. Being open and vulnerable with trusted people, right? Just getting out of all of this egoic stuff. and really rooting in that. So last but not least, in the last minute here, there's a little bit about forgiveness, right? So you've done this work of identifying your ego, taking action, reprogramming the mind to higher consciousness. Now it's time for the main event, right? All of this has been leading up to forgiveness. This talks about how ego keeps you separate, forgiveness plugs you in. And then this is kind of the process here of forgiveness. And then I don't include a forgiveness meditation here only because if people are not ready for it, merging consciousness with someone that has abused you can feel traumatic, or there could be like a traumatic response to it. So I like to take people right up until this point in the work so that nobody skips the steps and then, ends up it kind of ends up backfiring. So the forgiveness meditation stuff is typically at least something right now that I do one-on-one with people who feel ready in a coaching, non-clinical, non-clinical therapist capacity, more as like a spiritual teacher in that capacity and coach. So that is basically the work. So I will stop there. Thank you so much for your mindful attention as I blow through all of these concepts. And I would love to take your questions and feedback.
Yeah, like I said, I just have never heard, I've been around the block spiritually and I've never heard of this method. And this is why it's just so unique and so powerful. And I think, even looking at the spreadsheet and things like that, you start to realize, yeah, there are these conflicts. You are egoic, but you're also, you've got your lower ego going. You do have ego motivations, but you do understand the higher consciousness. And I think what's so powerful is what you said about how free you feel when you're in the other one and how light you become, because one of the things you didn't talk about, which is that your work actually frees you from anxiety. It takes anxiety and stress out of your life completely. And isn't that the thing that keeps us like down, keeps us in the matrix, so to speak? Like you said, it's the thing that you're around someone that's free and it's like, wow, like what did they do? Like, where did they get?
Yeah.
And not to mention the bliss states that you're talking about. So I want you to talk a little bit about what you found on the other side of doing this self-reflection. And I want to also take questions from our members. So again, she's going to be doing a masterclass on September 26th. You can also get this workbook that she's doing on her site. It's $10. It's a no-brainer. You just go in and you start it. This is self-starting, like this is self-analysis. And then you can also have her help you through things, right? As support, especially like she said, with the forgiveness part. But once that's down, that is incredible what's on the other side. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And in the meantime, let's talk about what you found at the other side of doing this reflection.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Everybody talks about fear as keeping us down, but I actually think it's the justifications that keep us down and the justifications that keep us in the matrix, right? Because there's fear here. And just on the other side of these justifications is freedom. So if you remove the justifications, oh, well, I need my money. I need to be this way. All the conditions that I need to meet in order to be free. When you remove those conditions, then the fear comes up and kind of just dissipates. And so it's like if you're trapped down here, the biggest obstacle is yeah, again, catching those justifications and releasing yourself from them. And then when you do, you're like, I'm limitless. I'm limitless. I don't need anything. I don't need anyone. I mean, yes, we all need people, et cetera, in the 3D, but in terms of being able to access that self, that self in your higher consciousness, there's no conditions to loving. There's no conditions to acceptance. There's no conditions to compassion. And when you are limitless, you're limitless, right? And so conditions limit you. So when you're conditionless, you're limitless. I'll say that. When you're conditionless, you're limitless. So remove those conditions. Yeah, that's it. And so what it feels like is awesome. It just feels awesome. Totally embodied, right? And you're living life from a pretty solid place, pretty unshakable place, an unflappable place. People, okay, so I'll give you this example because it's the first time I felt really, really free. So when I was younger, I was a ballet dancer, and everything was about being thin and being famous and all of this stuff. And once I stopped caring about that and I started nourishing myself and accepting myself, anybody could say anything about the way I looked and it didn't matter. So when I became an eating disorders therapist, and I would be at work and training PhD students, et cetera, and patients would say to me, you know, Dr. Deliberto, you're so fat. I can't believe you're eating that. I would never want to look like you. I can't believe you're telling me to eat this. Like I'm not eating it because I never want to look like you. My students would be like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I am fine. Are you asking me if I'm okay? You should ask that patient if they're okay, because clearly they're not okay. I'm fine, right? So this idea of, you know, whatever anyone said to me, I knew that my worth wasn't based on any of this stuff, these conditions. So I felt totally free and compassion that allowed me to sit there and, quote, take the abuse, which I didn't experience as abuse. I just thought of it as like a puzzle. Like, okay, I have to help this person get from justifying and protecting their ego by lashing out at me to eating that cheeseburger, gaining the weight, and then thanking me in 2 years. That's the plan. That's the goal, right? And so it's essentially like you can get to this place that is, again, unflappable. No matter what anybody says, no matter what anybody does, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay because you don't have conditions on yourself. Right? So that's kind of the step one, is like this freedom. Then there's the bliss, which is like a whole other thing. So I'm going to tell you completely honestly about the bliss state. So I was recording a course for TCCHE, which is a great conference, the Conference for Consciousness and Human Evolution. Marianne Williamson speaks there, Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, the Hertogs, Doctors JJ and Desiree Hertog, Anita Morjani, amazing teachers. Reverend Michael Beckwith. And so recording a course for TCCHE on this method. And to be honest, I mean, I've done these meditations max for 2 hours, maximum. Normally it's 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. And there are 4 different meditations that come with this program. And I usually do like 1 a day, right? So to record this course, it was Mother's Day of this year. And we recorded 4 different versions of each of the 4 meditations. So I was meditating all day for the filming of this course and meditating with the sound guy and the camera guy. Actually, they hadn't really meditated before and they didn't really have a big job, right? The camera guy just was to point the camera. I'm sitting there meditating. He doesn't have to do anything, right? So it's like, okay, let's all meditate together. And meditating with these 2 guys all day, I left there feeling like a little like buzzed, right? And then I got home and it's almost as if I had taken some sort of substance. This wave of bliss came over me. I couldn't stop it. I wasn't efforting. It was unstoppable. And I laid in my bed and I was just feeling this sense that all of the spiritual masters talk about, but feeling it and knowing it, that everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. We truly are all one. So this went on for like 3 days, right? I'm like, just like in my bed like this, like, you know, like having these thoughts. And so I finally call our friend Alan Steinfeld and I say, Alan, I need help. I'm in this bliss state. I can't get out of it. What do I do? I have to teach tomorrow. I was teaching a course on treating eating disorders in pregnant women. It's like a super important thing that nobody's talking about. You know, people with eating disorders, if they're pregnant, their babies are not getting food. Right. This is important. I need to get out of this bliss state because I need to function. I need to serve. And he said, Tara, people spend 20 years in an ashram trying to get to bliss and you're trying to get out of it. He's like, why don't you just enjoy it for a little while? And I was like, I can't, I need to serve. And so that actually was a whole other level of surrender. So I'm looking at the book on my shelf. So I opened David Hawking's Transcending Levels of Consciousness, and I'm reading about the bliss state. And he talks about when people get to that bliss state, half the people just die. They're like, whatever, I'm done. I'm out of here. You know, I've peaked. And so everything's perfect. I don't need to live, like whatever. And then the other half of people surrender the bliss state in order to be of service. And that is a whole other level. And I thought, I got to give this up. I'm going to do it. And so I let go of that. I was like kicking and screaming, and I felt the ego justifications. And so that was super interesting and unexpected, that in the bliss state, my ego then attached to the bliss state and was like, no, 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 you can't give it up. You can't give it up. You need this. And I was like, I need to help these clinicians understand how to identify and treat eating disorders in pregnant people. That's what I need to do. And so, you know, and also I'm a mom of a 4-year-old, it's right. So it's like, I have things to do. I need to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and whatever else. Right. So like, okay, like, all right, I'm letting go. And yeah, it was really hard, but then the bliss moved from this kind of spiritual bliss into more of like an embodied bliss. And for instance, like feeling this bliss in my body as I was boarding an airplane, or you know, doing things that I would normally really not enjoy. So just finding that physical joy and embodiment in the 3D, and trying to kind of stay connected to higher consciousness while also simultaneously operating and serving in the 3D. It's actually really hard. I'm still working on it. I haven't gotten it yet, to be honest. I kind of ping pong. And sometimes, if I'm being really honest, sometimes the bliss is so intense and I so don't want to surrender it that I have to kind of like ego trick myself to like go down. Like I think of something really sad, or I kind of like get myself a little bit more back in my ego so I can function, which is not optimal. I think I have to figure out how to integrate, but that's completely honestly where I am with this. So I'm still, I guess in a couple of years when I get that, I'll write the manual on how to do that. But for now, still working out the kinks. So yeah, the experience.
Such a great experience to feel that. It's
Yeah.
so
Do we have any questions from our audience?
Go ahead with yours.
Yeah, so I thought that was I thought it was really interesting, the things you were saying about bliss. And what are your ideas on, because I've experienced it myself and I find like I can blend it into whatever it is I wanted to accomplish. And so it seemed like yours was almost debilitating in a
It
sense.
was almost it was. I mean, I think my eyes must have looked like that. Like I didn't look normal. I'll put it that way. Like it probably looked like I was on drugs or something. Like I was just like, yeah. So I think that, but that was initially, that was when it kind of first came over. But now I think, yeah, I can kind of blend it a little more. But the thing that I'm grokking is how to do anything when everything feels perfect. Everything is perfect. Why am I doing anything? Why am I teaching anything? Why am I helping anyone? Everything's perfect. Everything is exactly perfect. Right. And so that was the tough thing. Cause like in that state, motivation to do in the 3D, there's no motivation. And to Alan's point, he was saying, listen, just being there and being very high consciousness is doing a service, right, to the planet. But what he and I had talked about, along with our friend Marla, was that typically when people are experiencing this level of bliss, they are in an ashram, actually, right? Or they are on a spiritual path. They're in the Himalayas. They have people at the ashram bring them food or take care of their needs. And I'm the person that needs to bring the food. I need to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? So how do I be a mystic and a mom? How do I operate like this? That was the question. So I kind of felt like I needed to effort a little bit because of that awareness. But to be quite honest, yeah, it would have been really nice to be in an ashram. And maybe in the future, I will be in an ashram for some period of time, having people bring me tea or whatever, you know, and we'll see how it goes. But it sounds, Adam, like you've integrated this
Well,
a little more.
you know what? And I have no idea if you have any artistic background, but I think that I can draw from that. So artists often, and a lot of artists I've known, they experience that bliss in their work.
Oh, interesting. And so they're working and creating in
Their
that
work,
state.
their creativity is the source of the bliss, being directly connected with that creative expression. And so that's where I'll bring it out, and I can create a wonderful meal, a wonderful experience. I can create wonderful work, whatever it might be, if I'm bringing that artistic creativity, if it's a work of true love and passion, then I think that's how I channel it in and through. And it can be
Oh, that's so
sports,
sweet. So good.
it can be anything. You can enjoy a drive. It can be like, oh, I got to run an errand, but you can have that bliss moment and like, I'm going to take every curve just perfect for my own expression, like I'm almost like I'm painting it with a brush. So
No, that's really good. When I'm writing, I can get into a flow, but I'm a ballet dancer and an academic, right? These are the most cognitively controlled things. Like people say like ballet dancers are artists. They are not artists. They are the mediums, right? They're the mediums for the director and the choreographer who are the real artists. And we're just the instrument, right? We have to like, like every finger has to be perfect. Like everything is so hyper controlled, right? And there could be a flow state that enters into it, but it is hyper controlled. And so even right, the food and like everything is controlled. And so the same kind of thing in academics, right? Where like the research is very cognitive. So for me, even though I was artsy in the sense that I was a ballet dancer, I wasn't really artsy. And at least me personally. And so yeah, this is still, like I said, pretty new for me. So maybe I should take up painting or something. I love painting. I'm not very good at it, but I love it. So yeah.
I know what you mean because when I first woke up, I clearly remember having the thought, like, no wonder priests don't marry. Like, no wonder, because,
How could
and
you?
no, because this is like, I felt the same way. I was like, I can't function in this regular world, in this state. Like, it's too complex. It's too, so it's interesting, but it's also like, that's why I always thought, oh, an ego is somewhat healthy. We're always trying to like shut down the ego, but it's healthy because it will actually drive you to do stuff. But I think we've got a question from Manny, and then we're going to tell people where to find you and everything. But I think one of the things that the most important things that you're saying is like, look, once you get over on this other paradigm, because that's literally what is happening right now. We are going from this 3D state where we thought we were supposed to take care of ourselves and our family to, oh my gosh, we're all one. We need to take care of everything all at once, like through our consciousness. That is the paradigm that we're trying to understand somehow. And this gets us there. And what's so interesting is you said, oh yeah, when you're in that, then everything is ease and grace. The thing just comes to you. The all of it just comes to you, and it's better than you could have ever dreamed.
Yeah.
And
Also, right? And also peanut butter and jelly, right?
I,
Right. Mm-hmm.
yeah, but that's building the connection of the rest of your life that you're having. So it's also, you know what I mean? It's very important. But one of the things that was interesting is a teacher, Judy, she's passed now, but from the mystery school, she was like, look, in this tumultuous time where everything's changing, she goes, look, what people are going to realize, they're going to have everything taken away from them. They're going to have their job, they're going to have their relationships, whatever they hold on to, they're going to get taken away. And she goes, why? Because consciousness is all you need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is what brings you food. That is what brings you the thing. That is what brings you the love or the this or the that. And she was like, until we learn this hard lesson, that's what this disruption is going to cause. And so I was like, I didn't really, like you said, I didn't really understand her or even agree with her when she said that.
But it's true.
Now I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Because when you feel safe, no matter what happens, because you're in a state of non-identifying with your little puny story, then you're free and you're safe. And it's like whatever's happening is going to be, yeah, it's like you're not over identifying with small details. You're in the big picture.
Yeah. And I want to get to Manny's question really briefly. What I'll say is I was in a really tough, like a very dangerous situation a couple years ago, and surrendering my life. Like, okay, if I die, I die. Like I have no attachment to this physical body. It catapulted me. Like that was another really, really big awakening moment that kind of shifted me further into the spiritual paradigm. And yeah, when there is like a real sense of, if my body's gone, I'm going to be fine. That's right. There's that level. And then I think when we get out of all of those conditions and all of those justifications and all of the fears come up and get expressed, and that bliss is overwhelming, then yeah, it's channeling that into the day to day, and like that's what's running the show. And that was the other thing I failed to mention, which was and I'm still to some extent in the bliss state, but I was, when it first hit, those first couple weeks, I was completely observing what I was doing. Like it was like watching another person in a non-dissociated way, in a witness seat way. But prior to that, I had kind of had to try to work to get into the witness seat, work to observe my thoughts, versus I couldn't get out of the witness seat. I was like straight jacketed into the witness seat. Like I was just watching everything unfold. And I was like, who is doing this peanut butter and jelly sandwich making? Like, whoa, like it's just like, just like it's just happening. And yeah, and so there's all of these various parts of the experience of being untethered from fear and being in contact with a higher consciousness and learning to navigate like the various points of it is very interesting. So I'll pause there, and Manny, over to you. Curious to hear what your question is.
Yeah, thank you. Thank everyone for making time and space to be here on this journey. Thank you, Tara, for illustrating something and helping me connect so many dots. Earlier, I made reference to the Course in Miracles. The Course talks about love, and then, at the 3D level in this matrix, there's love, and then there's ego. But on a 5D level, on a higher plane of consciousness, there is no opposite to love, because love is all encompassing. So we're down here. This is how I see it. We're down here chasing bells and whistles and bling bling and whatever Madison Avenue tells us to go after, um, and stressing about not having strong enough Wi-Fi. But that's the small signal. The big signal is that higher consciousness. And I want to share something as a therapist. Like when I was working the beginning of the pandemic, so we know that hit us in March of 2020. I hit around mid-October, and I remember finishing with a client, and I closed the door, and I was like, God, why is there so much suffering going on? Like I felt survivor's guilt on a whole new level because I was doing okay, like financially and everything. The moment I closed that door and had that moment, my consciousness, I felt this energy drain. Like I can almost see my energy tank dropping, and all kinds of weird, like unhealth, all kinds of health issues started popping up, and all kinds of unhappiness. And it's because I started identifying with guilt, the consciousness of guilt, and not able to forgive that, or not able to reconcile that, cost me a lot in health. And then fast forward to here now. Thank you, Tara, because so much of this really clicks for me. Um, just like too much to mention. So I really don't have a question. Um, I just want to thank you, and I look forward to the master class. That's the only question I had, but Zenka already shared that, so I look forward to downloading that self-assessment tool and working it, because like they say, it works if you work it.
Yeah.
And hopefully by the master class, I would have test driven that and kind of worked it within me, and be more up to speed on what you're doing. But fabulous. I mean, I've been a psychotherapist for 20, I don't even want to say, a little bit more than 2 decades. And it's really, I mean, I know we're helping people, but with the whole medication matrix, it's very limited. It's not really empowering what we're doing. It's just symptom management, and it's not healthcare. It's sick care what we're doing. But what you're sharing is really empowerment. And Zenka, you used the word understanding earlier. What tools like this is helping us is to do more inner standing.
Yeah, understanding. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Like I love that, Manny. And thank you so much for the kind words. And one other little nugget I'd like to share that is from my personal journey and isn't necessarily in the work, at least yet. So I had been very, very ill with an autoimmune disease for about 20 years. And part of the reason why I left my faculty position at Cornell was because I was working in New York City at New York Presbyterian. I was at the medical school, which is in New York City, and I had a very, very bad lung condition. And so I moved out here to California, and I think just living in California, earthing, grounding, having that 1800s solarium for tuberculosis thing. I didn't have tuberculosis, but had a lung condition. But just being at the beach, I think, was very healthy for my lungs. I met an amazing naturopathic doctor named Dr. Lawrence Freitas, who treated my gut microbiome by mapping it specifically and seeing that I had missing good bacteria and lots of unhealthy bacteria. And he helped with that, and he helped my gut, but my lungs, I still had a lung condition, even with the air and even with the gut microbiome. And so I started looking into Joe Dispenza's work, Dr. Joe. And so I did an online course with him. And in one of the online courses, he talks about, his work involves, right, imagining yourself healthy. And what my ego did at that point was like, do not imagine yourself healthy. This is too scary. You have been sick for so long. You're never going to get better. And you are going to be crushed with anxiety and sadness and disappointment when you get out of this meditation and your lungs are just as bad as you went in. And I thought, okay, I'm familiar with this voice. I know this voice. This is the justification matrix voice. This is the voice that's keeping me down. This is not me. I am limitless. Right? So I did that meditation and I
Yes.
let myself fully feel what it would be like to, and I know this is again, this is like a conscious action that depends on the person, to smoke a cigarette. Like I imagine myself smoking a cigarette and being totally fine. Not that I want to smoke a cigarette, but I couldn't even be around a cigarette without about 10 days of pain. Right? I couldn't travel. I mean, it was horrible. So I imagine myself like totally fine smoking a cigarette. I got out of that meditation. About 12 hours later, I was sitting on a porch and someone with a cigar walked by. It was totally fine. For the first time in years, I'm totally fine. I could smoke a cigarette in one hand, a cigar in the other hand right now and be fine. Yeah. And people in my field, they don't want to hear this. They know that I'm a fan of the UCSD researchers, Hemal Patel and his team, and what they're doing to support Dr. Joe's research. People in my field have like even giving me some warnings, like, we like you, but just make sure you don't kind of like step out of line. Like this, like Dr. Joe Dispenza stuff is really out there, and I'm like, yeah, but I don't have a lung condition, and like your medical system didn't help. I was on faculty at Cornell's medical school, right? I had access to all the most brilliant medical doctors. None of them helped me, right? 1 hour doing a meditation where I imagine that I can smoke a cigarette, and now I'm fine. So I don't know.
It was a stimulus response where you put 27 trillion cells in your body to work together in one harmonious moment.
Right. And isn't it so interesting, right? Because it's not about the content, right? Like if it were about the content of the cigarette or the cookie, right? But it's not about the cigarette. It's not about the cookie, right? Dr. David Hawkins says this, right? He says that food is only as healthy as you believe that it is. That's interesting. Right? That's super interesting because we're walking around, oh, this is good food, this is bad food, this is healthy food, right? We're poisoning ourselves with the fear. We're inundating our food with those fears, and then we're eating the food.
We're
That's so
mentally
unhealthy.
contaminating it. We're contaminating it mentally. Yeah, I
Right.
remember Dr. Emoto, bless the water, bless the
Yes.
food.
Yes. And
Yeah.
also when I was pregnant, I did all of those kinds of Dr. Emoto water meditations while I was pregnant with my son. That's a whole other thing, right? Meditating and infusing your body and as you carry a child, right? Whoa, like we're scratching the surface with the water stuff, right? Like pregnant women now. There's an interesting population, right? So anyway, lots of stuff here, right? Lots of stuff to unpack. So I wanted to mention that one little bit about, really overcoming the fear of being healthy and that the ego can justify these things. And I think that I've even written to Hemal Patel to say that this is my idea, like that the people that benefit from the Joe meditations versus not the Dr. Joe meditations, it's probably the willingness to face the fear of not getting healthy and being willing to imagine being healthy anyway. It's that willingness, that belief that it's worth maybe failing, that I think is that limitlessness.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Carolyn Miss brought us the word woundology. We invest so much energy, currency in my woundology, right? My chronic fatigue or whatever it is, that it's very scary to go there.
It's
Because our whole scaffolding can collapse, a house of cards, in one uh, good meditation, one blissful moment in meditation, in the right environment, right? Person, environment, setting.
right
You don't
set.
have to go to Peru, by the way. You don't have to go to
Right,
Peru.
right. I know. Yeah.
I love the idea. I'll see you in the jungle. We'll have some of that dark drink, but you don't have to. You don't have to. It's really our cells are listening. Our
They're listening.
27 trillion cells are listening.
And another just little note on this. So I actually have never done ayahuasca personally. What I will say as an eating disorders therapist is it's really interesting to see and hear stories of people who have had really, really severe eating disorders go through these psilocybin assisted therapies and they're blasted out of their ego for a moment and they can look back and see, wow, this is what it feels like to not be in my ego. Because again, there are these two kinds of illnesses, the kinds of disorders that people want to get rid of, like phobias, and then the kinds of disorders that people don't necessarily want to get rid of, eating disorders, narcissism, substance abuse, this kind of a thing, because we kind of get something egoic out of it. So when someone is willing to take psilocybin and boom, it kind of like blasts them out, then what can happen with the right therapy is that people can then start to make choices and engage in behaviors that are in alignment with higher consciousness, but they weren't even able to really access that higher consciousness before. But at a certain threshold, right? It depends on where you are in that spectrum, where you are in that consciousness paradigm. There are certain critical moments where I think we can make those leaps. Like, I don't think I could have ever before the forgiveness meditation, I don't think I could have done the Dr. Joe meditation where I imagined myself smoking a cigarette. I wouldn't have been there. I would have felt too unsafe. But I'm like, well, I forgave and I saw the light, literally, which is like not a figure of speech. It's a thing that happens, by the way. What? Okay, like now I can actually do these other kinds of more limitless meditations and start creating in this other way. So anyway, I feel like we could talk forever. We can talk forever on this.
Been so good, and you've shown us what it takes to have that, like that core, like you said, that unshakable, no matter what. If that person's saying, I can't believe you just ate that, you're fat, it's like it's more a sympathy toward them. Like there's a pillarness about who you are, and there's a brilliance about who you are. And thank you so much. It's so interesting. I'm going to share your site. So instead of Tara having her site be her name, it's stepintohigherconsciousness.com. And I'll show you it here, and show you a little bit about what she has to offer. So you can see, you can go all around. She talks about the method. She talks about, here's where you can actually download the whole packet. She also has some online courses coming up at the end of the year and other things that you can sign up. And it's it's just amazing. So this is a great site where you can get all her information. It's stepintohigherconsciousness.com. And we've also shared her links to social media. You can also find them in the YouTube. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit a like, share it. She will be back with us on the Thursday, September 26th, to do a masterclass where she's going to walk us through those charts. We also wanted to let you know that we're going to do spoon bending on Saturday or Sunday. For those of you that have never done it, or those of you that want practice, we're going to be doing that. You can go to starseedacademy.org/calendar, or you can go to lightnet.org as well. We're also doing a Stop Blocking Your Money Flow with Susan on the 29th. It's going to be an amazing course. We have Adam Apollo coming up next month. And speaking of Joe Dispenza, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, we're going to be doing a whole workshop with Melissa Tittle, who is the director of the new Joe Dispenza movie. And this is in lead up to our Purpose Labs, which are starting next month, which we believe that miracles just fill your life when you are in alignment with your higher self and your purpose. So this is going to be a chance for you guys to do some of the practices, learn about our research, and also learn about Melissa Tittle, who is the director of The Source. She's also the founder of Ancient Aliens, Code 12, and other things. So do you have anything else you want to leave us with or tell us about? But thank you so much for joining us and bring, it took a lot of courage and getting out of your ego to do what you've done in your career, to go from tenure track, Cornell University, to go, okay, wait a minute though, this is where I'm being called into. And so thank you for answering that call. Thank you for publishing this. Thank you for being so coherent. Thank you for, training all these professionals all over the world to administer what you've discovered. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'll give you the last word too.
Thank you so much, Zenka. So a couple upcoming things. A friend of mine, Michelle Fawn, who started the kind of YouTube fame thing early back when. She is a makeup artist. And anyhow, she launched her new platform called Afterglow. So I'm going to be on a show with Michelle Fawn on her Afterglow podcast coming up soon. I have a body image course that I haven't necessarily even posted about or launched. So I guess this is the official launch of the body image course, and I'll show you where you can find it. So on my website, Step Into Higher Consciousness, under the online courses, this first course here is a Udemy course. So if you're a therapist and you have patients that are struggling with body image, or you yourself are struggling, or you know of someone, that course is up there for you to see. And yeah, and then also on my website, there are some other media appearances I've done. When Biden dropped out of the race and Marianne Williamson wasn't able to be on the Awakening World, Scott Cadamus asked me to come on and fill in for her, as well as two other lovely women. So I'm discussing my work there, and you can find that all on my website, stepintohigherconsciousness.com. Oh, and then Instagram. So this is the thing. I don't love social media myself, and I don't post a lot of stuff on it, but I feel like, that that's something that I'm endeavoring to do, because that's how we spread information these days. And this is important information. We need to get it out there. So my Instagram, thank you, Zenka, for putting that in the chat. Raising Consciousness Tara is me. So hopefully I'll see you there on Instagram.
Oh, thank you so much. Tara, have a great night, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Okay,
It's 2 weeks or 1 week? It's 1 week. It's next week, right? It's the 19th today. The 26th is next week. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. We jammed it all into one thing. So yeah, in 1 week at this time at 6:30, you can join to be in this. Now you can do a Lightning membership. It's 144 for the whole year for 72 events, or you can just attend this particular workshop going to starseedacademy.org/calendar or lightnet.org. Again, looking at the calendar, that'll get you right into this, and we look forward to having you part of our community.
Thank you so much, Zenka and Adam, for having me. And thank you all so much for being here. It's been really beautiful to spend this time together. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me, contact me through my website. I'd love to meet. We could do sessions together, these coaching sessions, whatever it is that calls to you. I would love to explore. So thank you so much again for being here.
Thanks for letting